The Prime Minister delivered an address to the nation on Sunday night. Several key points that he raised was that the refinery at Petrotrin will remain closed. He said that it would cost $7 billion if the refinery is to keep running, and that is something that cannot happen right now. The oil production continues to decline. Petrotrin will now focus on exploration and production, new refinery to come possibly. Hopefully we would hear a little bit more about that, but the union is getting the first option to control it, and the state will look to import the refined products. Now, is this the end of a political career? The Prime Minister said it could possibly be if this does not go well for the government, but we want to get a little bit more into this, and with me is the head of the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Chamber, Dr. Thackeray Daxdriver. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What are your thoughts on the Prime Minister's address to the nation? Do you think that is what the people wanted to hear?
Well, I think he already sort of laid out the history and the reasons behind the decision, and I think he just made it very clear that this is the decision which has been taken, and this was the only decision which made sense from a business point of view for the company. I think that he said that that's the priority. The economics is what's important. And then I think he laid out a pathway for the future. So I think that, yes, I think people wanted that certainty. So we know the situation that we're facing, and we just now have to work on making the best of this difficult situation.
But was that really the only option? The union has continuously said that, you know, we could have looked at different ways of getting different results, better results for Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, one of the things that both the trade union and the Energy Chamber one of the things we've shared in common, one of the few things we've shared in common, has been a consistent call to depoliticize the decision-making around the future of Petrotrin. We're both called for Petrotrin to be run as a business, not to be run as a sort of a political enterprise to give jobs for the boys and those sort of things. And so a board has been put in place, and they have taken a business decision. They have looked at all of the facts. They have looked at all of the options. I don't think this is a decision which has been taken lightly. This is a difficult decision to be taken. But when they've looked at all of that information, that is the decision which the board has come to. And I think we have to trust that the board looked at everything they needed to look at. And this is the only logical way that they could proceed to maintain a viable company. There's a lot of speculation which I see out there on social media about why didn't they do this, why didn't they do that, and frankly some of the things that people are talking about really would not have changed the needle at all. I mean, this idea about importing oil from Guyana, Trinidad already imports our oil for the refinery. It wouldn't change the model at all. So I think that those sort of conversations, people need to be realistic. That the board has gone through a very long process of looking at all of those things. And as a commentator from outside, it's easy to throw up other ideas, but really the board is in there looking at the details of this, and this is the decision which they've come to.
Yeah, because the argument was that if you shut down the refinery at Petrotrin, that means you might lose business from Guyana. But as you said, we already import oil for production because we are underproducing at the refinery.
We're already producing we're already importing 100,000 barrels a day. Whether we import that from Guyana or from Colombia, it doesn't change the economics, because the Exxon and Guyana will want to sell their oil at a market price. They're not going to give us a cheap oil. I mean, why would they do that?
Do you expect there to be a new refinery in Trinidad based on what the Prime Minister said?
I think that it will have to be a very different sort of refinery. I think that restarting the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery as currently configured, certainly with its current work practices, that just is not something which is feasible. I think that we need to be realistic that the global refining business is very challenged. So there have not been very many refineries opening in this part of the world. In fact, a lot have been closing over the last decade or so. The refineries, where you see new refineries, it's close to the markets. So you've seen refineries opening in the big Asian markets, in China and in India in particular. In the Atlantic Basin, very few new refineries being constructed, and in fact, a lot of refineries being closed down. The refining business, people are investing that are looking for long-term investments. Obviously, these are not short-term investments, and I think that the reality of the future projected demand for transport fuels is also putting off a lot of investors. There is a very strong move globally towards electric vehicles, and the future of gasoline and diesel, I think people are questioning that. So people who are taking long-term investments are going to say, well, do we have a future in this? So I think finding investors to invest in a new refinery may be a challenge.
And because another concern raised by people is how would this affect the price of fuel at the pump? But before we get into that, the Prime Minister did say that the union would probably get the first option to be in charge of a refining company if that is the way that it goes.
Well, I think that's an offer which he was making. I'd be extremely surprised if that offer was taken up.
Yeah, the union did say yesterday that they will not be considering it because they see it as a plan for the government to actually sell Petrotrin, the refinery that is.
Well, I think that this is there's a lot of commentary around that, but I think the board and the government has been very clear that they're shutting down the refinery. If somebody came along and wanted to buy those assets, well, then of course we should sell them. And this would be good financially for the country. But I think that's unlikely. We'd like to see that happen in the short term.
So it's not something that would be able to happen anytime soon.
Well, I don't think that's something which is in the offing. I don't think there's a buyer who's sitting there in the wings.
So the state will be importing the refined products. How is that going to affect the pumps, if at all?
The first thing to say is that the price at the pump in Trinidad is controlled by the government. It is a controlled price. It's one of the few prices in Trinidad where there's actual government control of it. So the price at the pump is what the government decides the price at the pump will be. It's in the government's power to change that. The price at which fuel is purchased doesn't impact directly the price which people pay at the pump. Now, the Minister of Finance has already said that he is looking at increasing prices to remove the subsidy, which again has crept back up again as international oil prices have gone back up higher. So we might see prices going up at the pump, but that's not because the refinery has closed and we're importing product. It's because the government takes a decision that they're going to sell.
Welcome back, everybody. We want to continue the discussion with Dr. Thackeray Driver, who is the president of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. Before we went to the break, in our previous conversation, we were chatting about the possible increase in the price of fuel at the pump.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that it may not necessarily be because of the shutting down of the Petrotrin refinery.
Well, that's right, because this is the price at the pump is a controlled price, and it's a decision of the government to set the price at the pump. So it's the Minister of Finance who will look at all of the numbers and make a determination of what they think that the price should be. They might be moving to a situation where the price moves more regularly. This is something which they've talked about doing before. That's unrelated to closing the refinery. The price of the imported fuel, which Petrotrin will now be buying and supplying to NP, as opposed to buying crude oil and refining it, I don't think there'll be any significant difference in those two prices. So any increase in fuel price, which might come, but it's not going to come because the refinery has closed.
And that is something the Prime Minister did say, that despite closing down the refinery, it will not affect the price at the pumps, and also the price of cooking gas, as some people raise concern about.
Yeah, I think so. Cooking gas is slightly different from the transport fuels, because cooking gas, Petrotrin was effectively carrying the cost of that subsidy for the consumer, and so I think they're going to have to find a different way of doing that. The country produces cooking gas not just from the refinery, but also from Phoenix Park. So availability of cooking gas is not an issue, but Phoenix Park has always sold, quite rightly sold its LPG at a market price. So if there's going to be a subsidized price, as we've always had from the LPG, the cooking gas from the refinery, somebody's going to have to pay for that subsidy.
So do you see us getting to that point where we would have our fuel prices be fluctuating according to the world market price?
Well, we hope so. The Energy Chamber has advocated and lobbied for that for a decade or more now. It's a very unpopular position. People don't like that idea, but it is what we should do from managing the economy's point of view. It's the right thing to do. As the fuel subsidy, what people don't realize about the fuel subsidy is that it is a very inefficient way to transfer the country's wealth to people. It's better off people who get the majority of the benefit of a fuel subsidy. We should be subsidizing transport, public transport, not subsidizing people like myself with big vehicles to put diesel into our big cars which we drive alone. That makes no economic sense.
And as it is now, the government has already completely removed the subsidy from super.
No.
No.
It removed how the subsidy, if oil prices had stayed the same as they had been at this time last year, effectively there would have been no subsidy. But oil prices have increased significantly over the past year, so now there is a big subsidy again, which the government is paying.
So that needs to be controlled.
So that is something, well, it's a decision which the Minister of Finance is going to have to take, but it's unrelated to the refinery closing.
But Trinidad and Tobago consumes less than 25,000 barrels of refined products per day.
Correct.
The detailed economic analysis have shown that it makes far more sense for us to export the 40,000 barrels of oil that we currently produce and import the fuel we need. That is according to the Prime Minister.
Yes, yes, and that so you know, the amount of fuel that we need, 25,000 barrels a day, which is what we're going to have to import, is actually slightly less than that, but roughly that amount. We have enough infrastructure in place at Point-à-Pitre to do that, to give us a long period of cover. So we you know, this idea that somehow we'll be susceptible to losing that supply, there's months worth of storage there which you can put in place. And Trinidad could also operate as a location where we can buy in bulk fuels and sell to the other markets in the small markets in the region.
But there is the argument that Trinidad and Tobago, we have it. Why not just do it ourselves rather than depend on others to do it for us?
Because we're losing money doing it ourselves.
But how do we become more self-sufficient then?
In self-sufficiency only makes sense if it makes sense from an economic point of view. Okay? If you're losing money doing something, why not just buy and import that fuel? Let's sell our crude oil and put the investment behind increasing our crude oil production. There's plenty of crude oil still in Trinidad to be produced. We need to focus Petrotrin on producing that crude oil on the upstream side of the business. We need to increase that from 40,000 barrels a day we have at the moment. You know, that needs to go up. The oil is there in place. That creates the economic activity. Let's concentrate on the positive side of this and create a viable business for Petrotrin. Where it can make money and pay the taxes to the country.
Because as the Prime Minister did say yesterday, it's illegal for Petrotrin not to be paying its royalties and taxes.
Well, that's correct, yeah.
So the plan is to close the refinery, you export the oil, and you import the products.
That's correct.
Financially, what would that do for us?
Well, financially, it helps in our forex, because Petrotrin has been a net drain. It helps make Petrotrin profitable, so that means that the government is collecting more tax, and it should help to boost activity in the upstream. So that helps all of the communities like Point Fortin, Santa Flora, Le Bray, in the Southwest Peninsula, in fact across South Trinidad, where there's the upstream industry in place, and hopefully we'll see a big uptick in activity there, more drilling activity, more workovers. Investments in the pipelines and the tanks, and so that should drive new business activity in those areas.
So no need to worry too much, but the concern is that so many people are going to lose their jobs.
So I think that there is a clear worry. There's a clear impact on people's lives, and this is something which we need to be very realistic about, and the government needs to think about how it's going to mitigate that impact. That's not really an issue for Petrotrin. We've asked the board of Petrotrin to run the business as a business. The social fallout from closing the refinery is going to take place in San Fernando and environs in South. It affects many of my member companies are going to have to restructure how their business operates because they have traditionally sold a lot of services and goods to the refinery. Obviously, that goes away. The people who work there are going to have to make some major adjustments. So we have to be very sympathetic to that situation, and the government needs to put things in place to cushion that blow and to ameliorate the impact and help people onto a new, more sustainable pathway into a new future.
But I just want to get back to this point that we made earlier about the refinery possibly being sold. The union did say that it is not going to accept any control because it belongs to the people. Do you share that same view?
No, my view is that this is a valuable asset, and the asset belongs to the people, and we need to get the best return as we possibly can. So I think that if that's run by the union, by a management buyout, by a joint venture, that's all great. We should we have an asset which, if there's any value left in it, we should maximize the return from that asset.
Dr. Driver, I would like to thank you very much for joining us this morning to give your opinion on the Prime Minister's address to the nation. But before we go, I want to get your thoughts on Petrotrin itself and the Prime Minister saying that he wants the company to focus more on production and exploration.
Yes, well, I think that's exactly what they now need to do. The decision's been taken. Let's get behind supporting the company on increasing oil production.
Do you think that is going to work?
I think that it has a much better chance of working than the current way which the company has been working, but it's still going to be a lot of hard work. This is not an easy thing to do because you've got to also restructure how the upstream part of the company is working. If the upstream goes around business as usual, then I don't think it's going to work. It has to be closing the refinery, restructuring the upstream, and starting a different way of doing business in the upstream.
It's a lot of work that would need to go into this. In the next 2 to 3 years, what do you see happening?
Well, I see the refinery closing, people getting their payouts from that, and I see the focus going onto the upstream. And I hope within 2 to 3 years we'll see some increased oil production for upstream, and Petrotrin stabilizing, paying off some of the people it owes money to, and paying its taxes.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Thackeray Driver, for joining us. We now take you back to Lisa, who is going to tell us all about school reopening.